Hello, everyone. My name is Denis Patterson, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the High Meadows Environmental Institute at Princeton University, and also with the Department of Math at Brandeis University. I'm going to talk today a little bit about my career in math and how I got to where I am now, and also a little bit about my research in ecology. So to start off, I thought I would discuss my personal background, where I'm from. So you've probably guessed already that I'm Irish. And you're correct. I'm from a small town in County Wicklow called Baltinglass. And here's a picture of it. It's a pretty small rural place. This really is the whole town, population of about 1,000 people. And this is where I grew up. So what are the kind of primary industries? What do people do around here? Again, you can probably guess. It's mostly farming, and it's not a huge producer of mathematicians. So how did I end up pursuing a career in mathematics coming from here? Well, I realized early on that I was interested in math. It was my strongest subject in school by far. But pretty quickly, I had to confront what jobs are there for someone who's interested in math, and what am I going to pursue? Well, it turns out actually there are tons of careers in math. Data scientist, statistician is a really popular career choice. There are lots of jobs in finance, actuarial work, so insurance, calculating pension premiums. You can work in software engineering, you could be a math teacher, or you could be a mathematician academic like I am now. So this is not an exhaustive list, just a few of the many things you can do. But if I think back to when I was in high school then, what did I actually know about when I was considering what I wanted to do for my career? Well, I knew about these ones, or rather my guidance counselor told me that these are some things you can do. So I knew a little bit about the idea of you could work in finance, you could work as an actuary, and I knew you could be a math teacher. That seemed clear, but I had to make a decision then about what I would do. And actuary seemed like a good, solid job choice. So I pursued a career in actuarial maths. This is the degree I chose. And I went off to university with the idea that I would become an actuary. How did that work out for me? Well, very good in some ways. I really enjoyed studying math. Going to university was a great fit for me. For personal development, it was terrific. And I made lots of lifelong friends. There were some downsides as well. So it turned out I didn't want to be an actuary at all. And I realized that pretty early on, and I came to a crossroads. I had to figure out, what would I do next? Well, it turned out that I took on an undergrad research project, and I realized actually not only do I enjoy math, but I enjoy doing research in math. So I was really lucky to meet a great mentor who I worked with, who later became my PhD advisor, and I took on a PhD in applied math. So 4.5 years later, completed my PhD. I came to Brandeis with the idea of doing more interdisciplinary research in applied math. I started working on some projects related to applying math in ecology. And very recently that led to me joining the Environmental Institute at Princeton to work on vegetation models. So some things that I think you could take away from my career path. Firstly, there are loads of interesting opportunities in math. You get a great skill set, and there's lots of things you can do with it. I did not plan my career at all. I couldn't have planned my career. I didn't know about these opportunities when I was at high school age, and I couldn't have any idea of what I would do later, even though things worked out for me well in the end. And in fact, it's okay to not know what you want to do. Most people's plans change. You have to have some kind of initial plan to pursue, of course, but you have to be flexible, and things will take you wherever you'll go. One guiding principle that I kind of followed in my career was to pursue the things that I enjoyed and try to play to my strengths, which was doing math, and it turned out later doing research. Something you mightn't have thought about as much, I didn't think about when I was your age, was that I needed lots of advice and I needed great mentors. And these come in all different shapes and sizes. And I was really fortunate to have people who guided me through the important decisions and helped me figure out that this is actually where I want to be. So now I'm working in applied math, applying it to ecology, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about my research area and the things that I work on. So my research area is broadly defined as dynamical systems, and this is the mathematical study of how systems evolve over time. So I'd like to introduce it by bringing in a key concept in dynamics, which is the idea of stability. So we have here a simple experiment of a pendulum. So the pendulum has a rigid arm here and a weight at the end. And there are actually two possible positions this pendulum can take. it can actually sit in this straight up orientation in red, where it's perfectly balanced, or it can hang like it's doing now in the straight down position. So if we do an experiment with this pendulum, it's going to swing, there's going to be forces of drag, and eventually it's going to come to settle in this green position, hanging straight down. Mathematically, there's two solutions here for the pendulum. It can go straight up or straight down, but of course, physically, we know that almost always it's going to select the green solution in the straight down position. And this is what stability is. The green solution is the physical solution that we're going to observe. We call it the stable solution, whereas the red solution is mathematically possible, but physically it's unstable. We call it unstable because if I touch the red solution, the pendulum's going to fall and we're going to end up in the green position. So it's a simple kind of concept, but we can make it precise mathematically. Things can be a little more complex in practice. So I have another experiment here with basically a hill where this red ball is sitting in the middle and two valleys to the left and right. So the red ball is currently in an unstable position. If I touch it from the left or right, it's going to fall into one of the valleys. So in this situation, I actually have two stable solutions, and we call the system bistable because I have one stable solution here on the left, which is where the green ball is, and I have a stable solution here on the right, which is where the blue ball is. And it depends where I start the ball, that's what's going to determine where it's going to end up. So if I start in the green domain over here on the left, I'm going to observe the green stable solution. But if I start in the blue domain here on the right, I'm going to observe the blue ball stable solution. So this seems simple in this kind of experiment, but you can imagine if we're looking at, let's say, a system in ecology, multiple stable solutions to a large complex system, that's going to be very, very difficult to deal with. And it's not going to be physically obvious like this with a simple picture. So that takes mathematical analysis to figure out what are the stable solutions and which one are you going to observe in practice. So moving on to applications in ecology then, I study forest-savanna systems. And we have here on the left a tropical forest. And these tropical forests are characterized by the fact that they have roughly 70% tree cover or more, whereas savannas are characterized by the fact that they have typically less than 40% tree cover. Why do these tree cover percentages matter? Well, because if you want to look at data, you end up looking at things from satellites, and these 70% and 40% numbers, these are things we can characterize with that satellite data. Two facts that I like, because they're symmetric, are the facts that about 20% of the world's oxygen supply is coming from these forests, and about 20% of the Earth's landmass is covered by these savannas. So it gives you an idea of the importance and scale of these kind of ecosystems and why it's crucial that we preserve them, and for me, that we understand them, model them, and figure out how to best carry out that preservation. So now I'm going to show exactly what bistability has to do with these forest-savanna systems. This plot here shows us satellite data from sub-Saharan Africa, which has tree cover on the y-axis and mean annual rainfall on the x-axis. Each of these black dots is a single pixel from satellite data. So in other words, here, this pixel has more than 3,000 millimeters mean annual rainfall and probably about a little bit over the 60% of rainfall. And when ecologists look at this data, what they expect to see is for low rainfall levels, let's say 0 to 1,000 millimeters, they expect to see savannas. Low rainfall should give you a savanna. And that's roughly what we see. Less than 40%, we know that should be a savanna. But if you have more rainfall, you should eventually start seeing forests emerge. And this is where the data is showing something that was not expected. Between about 1,000 and 2,500 millimeters of rainfall, you see in this gray region lots of forests, so more than 70% up here, but actually you haven't gotten rid of these savannas. You have still quite a number of savannas emerging. So what the data indicates is that actually you may have two stable states at intermediate rainfall, a forest state up here and a savanna state down here. So then if we look at this map of sub-Saharan Africa and we look at the dark orange and the light green regions, we see that there are these huge tracts of land that are potentially in this bistable regime, which means, for example, if you look at this green region here, This is currently presenting as forest, but it could easily switch to another stable state, which would be savanna, and that would result in a huge loss of tree cover, which would be an ecological disaster, and it's the kind of thing we want to avoid. If we look at a global picture then, we can look, for example, at South America, and again, you have this huge region in light green, where if this were to flip from forest to savanna, the other possible stable state, there'd be a huge ecological problem, huge loss of a major carbon sink, and it'd be a climate nightmare. So from a modeling perspective, what we want to do is we want to talk to some ecologists, and this is the kind of thing I've been working on. We want to figure out what are the important interactions in these systems, and they'll tell us what we need to incorporate in our model. So the first thing is that trees send seeds, fairly straightforward, and this enables more trees to establish. Fire plays a really important role in these ecosystems, which is not something I knew about at all, but it turns out that actually each year you have a huge number of fires, they burn down forest trees and they allow savannas to establish. It's a very important interaction. The savanna trees prosper in the context of fires because they've actually evolved a response to the fires. They have thick bark, their canopies are up high where the fire can't reach, and they resist the fire, whereas the forest trees have not adapted to the fire and they get burned down, replaced by savanna. So we take all these interactions. My job as an applied mathematician is to write down a model incorporating these, to analyze that model, talk to the ecologists again, communicate the findings, and try to discuss what that means for ecosystem preservation, let's say. So I'd like to present a couple of unexpected kind of findings from our modeling work. The first one is that you can get what are called periodic solutions. So if we think of ourselves as starting in the forest state, we can then have a fire which can burn forest trees, leading to a transition to grass. We're now in a grass state. There's no more forest trees present, so the savanna trees can establish. The savanna trees establish, but then they get rid of all the grass. The grass was what was carrying the fire that killed the forest trees in the first place. So now the forest trees can come back and we end up back in a forest state. So we go through this kind of cycle of forest to grass to savanna back to forest. And then looking in our model, we can plot our solutions versus time. So I have time on the x-axis, proportion of land covered by each species on the y. I have grass in dark blue, yellow rather is saplings, green savanna trees, and the lighter blue is the forest trees. And let's say if I focus on the green, we can see how over time, as we progress, the savanna trees cyclically oscillate with their populations going up and down. So an interesting thing to think about here is the fragility of the ecosystem. Without any outside forces, we have this nice cycle, and we cycle through the trees, the savanna. But if this system were, say, perturbed, maybe let's say by climate change, you could imagine, particularly when the forest trees are at their lowest point here, they could get killed off in the middle of this oscillation. So they will oscillate down. Maybe they could be pushed right to zero by, let's say, a climate event, and then they wouldn't be able to return to this nice oscillation. So these kind of simulations give us an idea of at what point might the ecosystem be most fragile or most susceptible to some kind of disaster. Another interesting thing we found in our modeling is that our model predicts self-organized vegetation patterns. So what does that mean? Well, I have here on the left a simulation of the model, which I'm going to run in one sec. And the green pixels are grass, the white pixels are forest trees. And you can see there's no particular organization to the way they're laid out, totally at random, no structure. In the real world, there is structure. This is data mainly from Africa, which shows these interesting kind of labyrinth-like vegetation patterns of grass and bare ground. And then if I run our model, really quickly, the model goes from a totally disordered state to this incredibly ordered state, which is kind of moving very, very slowly, because on ecological timescales, things happen extremely slowly. But the interesting thing is that we get these amazing banded vegetation patterns, which match remarkably well with real-world data from sub-Saharan Africa. So this was something that I think you couldn't predict without the model, and it emerges totally from the disordered system. Summing up, a few ideas and a few things to take away from the modeling. So the model reveals all kinds of unexpected behaviors that you couldn't have guessed at without actually formally writing down the model, doing the analysis, doing the simulations. Ecologists have lots of good ideas about the ecosystem too, but sometimes the modeling predicts things that you couldn't really have guessed at yourself. And the other thing is that the modeling helps us to quantify the ecosystem stability in the dynamical system sense, and from a real world sense, the fragility, how we could have an ecological disaster, when the systems are most vulnerable, and what kind of vulnerabilities they may have. So that's a little bit about me and my research. If you want to get in touch with me or talk to me about anything I've discussed in this talk, I'm available at Denis Patterson at princeton.edu. Thanks very much for your time.